Ekis. From the Llano Estacado to the Rio Grande Valley, from the bayou to the bottomlands, and from the desert to the rolling plains. And today from the East Coast to the Gulf Coast. Seminar for a wide range. Welcome to the Soil and Crop Sciences Hour of Power. Today we have a guest from the great vinegar-based barbecue state of North Carolina. Our guest needs no introduction. Dr. Howe, would you like to introduce her?
You just said she doesn't need an introduction. I will. I agree. I don't think that she needs an introduction. Most of you are aware. Dr. Cristine Morgan, she serves as a Chief Scientific Officer at the Soil Health Institute, where she establishes research priorities to advance soil health and develop scientific direction, strategy, implementation for soil health research programs. She's also an adjunct professor in the department here at Texas A&M. And her research emphasis is soil hydrology, petametrics, and global soil security. She's also an editor-in-chief at GeoGerma, which is a global soil science journal. She's the founding editor-in-chief of Soil Security. I guess that's a new journal article. Is that right?
Yeah, I had to put a shout out for it because, we're trying to get papers submitted. So
yeah. So she's also served on the board of directors for the Soil Science Society of America. She currently serves on the board of the North American Plant Phenotyping Network and is a fellow of the SSSA. She earned her MS and Ph.D. in soil science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is an excellent institution as well, and her BS degree in plant and environmental soil sciences from Texas A&M University, class of '98. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Cristine and let her tell us all about soils.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, can we see my slides?
We can see it.
Fantastic. I'll even put it in the presentation mode. There we go. All right. Well, I can see a few faces, and I just have to say it's great to see old friends and colleagues. I should say current friends that I haven't seen in a while, and colleagues. Thank you, Scott, for inviting me to have the opportunity to talk about the Soil Health Institute today. What I thought I would do is just, recognizing there's some students on, I just kind of wanted to introduce the Institute and talk a little bit about what it's like going from academic to nonprofit. And then also just kind of give an overview of the Institute. I had to throw in a few data slides because I couldn't help myself. In the end, always, once a scientist, always a scientist. But I'm hoping to finish this early and just have a conversation, have questions, things like that. So we'll get rolling. Okay, the Soil Health Institute, what are we? We are a 501(c) nonprofit. We were founded by the Samuel Roberts Noble Foundation. We're partially funded by the Samuel Roberts Noble Foundation, and originally founded by the Samuel Roberts Noble Foundation and the Farm Foundation. And our mission is to safeguard and enhance the vitality and productivity of soil through scientific research and advancement. And so what does that mean? That means that we are also very soft-funded, and we seek project opportunities as well as donations to advance our mission. And a lot of the work that we do is really focused on that adoption of soil health promoting practices and providing scientific advice on that. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about, who we are. So I'm the Chief Scientific Officer, and Wayne Honeycutt is the CEO and President. And Wayne had a career in the USDA, NRCS, and he was, in the administrative level in Washington, D.C. But he is also a soil scientist, and he first started working at ARS, USDA ARS. So anyway, that's Wayne and myself, and so we're both Ph.D. soil scientists. And then the rest of the administrative team is Sheldon Jones, who's our Chief Operating Officer. So he is, does all the finances and thinks also about, our big picture goals financially. And then Byron Rath is our sustainability specialist. Byron and Sheldon are not soil scientists, but they are immersed in it daily. And Byron's job is really relationships with other nonprofits and potential funders. More from, so I do a lot of interaction with potential funders that might fund projects, and Byron does a lot of interactions with potential funders that, would support, the Institute in general and not specific projects. So you can imagine a lot of that interacts. And so Byron does a lot of calling and connecting and things like that. Also on the team here so all 4 of us are in Morrisville, North Carolina. And also in Morrisville is Camille Hesterberg, who is our comm specialist. And if you are a soil scientist, you probably recognize the last name of Hesterberg. And yes, her father is Dean Hesterberg, who is a quite accomplished soil chemist at NC State. So that is just fortuitous that we get that. Anyway, Camille claims she learned nothing as growing up from being raised by a soil scientist, but she's learned a lot since she's joined the Soil Health Institute. We also have interns. Last summer, it was a lot of fun. We had 3 interns and it was great. This year we had 1 intern, but she stayed put in, I think she's in New York or Boston. Anyway, it was a big city. Anyway, she just stayed there, but we did have an intern, but it wasn't near as much fun, even though she was a very productive intern. And then the rest of us are, the group are scientists, and I've listed their names, but essentially we have scientists all over the United States. For instance, Kelsey Grove is a scientist there at Soil and Crop Sciences there in College Station. And primarily these project scientists, they are kind of like research scientists, maybe even like postdocs, some of them, this is their first job out of their Ph.D. And essentially they do research just like a research scientist would do or a postdoc. And the cool thing is that many of them are across the United States, and then they're associated either with a university like Kelsey or USDA ARS. They're all kind of positioned with a land grant or USDA. The exceptions to that are Paul Tracy, who is in Idaho. John Shanahan is in Nebraska, and he's an agronomist. And Archie Flanders is our agroeconomist. We have a full-time agroeconomist on staff as well. And David Lamb used to work for NRCS, and now he does a lot of our outreach and education activities. And he's done some cool stuff. So if you ever just want to watch a lot of web content about soil health, especially soil health and cotton production, Dave's your guy. So you can just go into our website and look at a lot of that stuff. All right. So why soil health? I think a lot of you that know me have already heard the spiel, but I love soil science. And I think that soil science and soil health are a key component to a lot of our global existential challenges that we have. And here they are: human health, water, food security, biodiversity, energy security, climate change adaptation, and climate change mitigation. Right now, a lot of our funding is about climate change adaptation and mitigation and water security. And biodiversity here at the Soil Health Institute. So, it's always the question, even though I've noticed since I joined the Soil Health Institute, we just don't get snared so much with the question of, well, what is soil health? I think people have accepted that it's a word that many people outside of academia are very engaged about and very interested in. Our definition of soil health is the same as that of the USDA, and that's the capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. I think many times when people kind of get caught up on what's the definition of soil health, really what they're thinking about is how do you measure it? How do you quantify it? And that's a lot harder than defining it. And, just some pretty pictures. I can't be a soil scientist and talk about soil without, showing some examples. This is a picture in South Dakota, 2 different pastures owned by different people and under different management. And if we look at the soil underneath those 2 pastures, the one on the right has a thicker A horizon. It's got more structure. It's just overall a healthier soil. And because, the others, and in this example, it's a lot about soil structure and carbon. And with that comes a lot of other benefits like water cycling. Here's another across the fence photo that has been taken And again, you can see on the left-hand side, there's a lot of residues, probably a no-till situation. On the right-hand side, it's more conventional. There's been a rainfall, and we can see on the right-hand side, the soil is crusting, it's puddling water, it's not routing water as we'd like on the left-hand side. And what does this mean practically? You might look at this and say, oh, the right-hand side, that'll dry up and that crop will be just fine. Well, probably there's a lot of nitrogen being shuttled to the atmosphere on the right-hand side because it's wetter. And then also, one of the big things that happened with, 2019, spring of 2019 with Prevent Plant, so farmers couldn't get into the field. It was a trafficability logistics issue. And again, the left-hand side here is, more trafficable sooner after a rainfall. And of course, we don't like to see this, gross, erosion bad. We like to see this. We like to see, the water coming off the field being clear and not muddy. And so, when we look across the United States, this is just an image of some of the ag statistics data, I think 2017, yeah. And we look at no-till. There's an 8.3 increase in no-till in the last 5 years, but a lot of places lost no-till. You can see Tennessee is still very high in no-till, but Tennessee used to be higher. And anyway, there just seems to be no huge gain in no-till as a soil health management practice. In cover cropping, the good news is cover cropping doubled since the last statistic. But double means goes from 2% of farmed acreage to 4%. It's not a lot. And so, we know that, no-till and cover cropping are really common, very basic soil health promoting practices that also help us sequester, help cycle our water, cycle our nutrients better. They have a lot of external benefits, but their adoption just feels kind of stagnant. And, one of the major thing that we work at Soil Health Institute is filling these gaps that prevent adoption. And, you can really ask yourself, is it because we don't know enough about soil? I don't know. It seems like we know a lot, right? And maybe if we had better measurement or more standard measurement, it might help. Is because the knowledge of how to manage the soil health system, we just don't know really well how to do regenerative ag and soil health management. And a lot of farmers would say that, like they say that they don't know the practices well enough. There's too much of a risk to change their practices. There is consumer demand for changing adoption, but maybe that isn't reconciling into dollars, right? Improved prices. There's definitely an issue with social capital. And what I mean by social capital is if I'm a farmer and I change my practices and my neighbors don't, I'm going to be weird, right? I'm not going to fit in with my neighbors. And that happens, and it's well documented. Economics, maybe the economic case isn't there. And at the Soil Health Institute, I'll show you some slides. We're really invested in trying to develop the economic case. Is it policy? Is the policy bad? Soil Health Institute, we do as much policy work as we can. Wayne used to go to DC a lot, not so much anymore, but we still are, working with and trying to inform policy with science. And the other thing you say, well, maybe it's just ignorance. Maybe we know how to do all this stuff and just nobody knows why it's so important to adopt soil health, or that we just can't do it. And I think it's probably a combination of a lot of these things, but I do think we can do it. And as I have transitioned from Texas A&M University to the Soil Health Institute, I have to say I'm more optimistic than I ever was because I'm pretty sure from the information I've seen, like I've been amazed by what cover crops can do. Just seeing it in the fields and being in farmers' fields, I've had a double take. And I would say that, even my own garden now is no-till and cover crops. And, it's hard. That's what I will say. It is hard to learn how to do that when you've always done things one way. And so here at the Soil Health Institute, we have this comprehensive strategy to increase adoption of soil health management systems. And instead of doing like the whole video thing, I just thought I would put it all on one slide And focus your attention to the middle, the black box, the producer's decision. That is, one of the fundamental components of the Soil Health Institute is we're farmer facing. And we recognize that to get soil health management practices adopted, it's got to be the decision of the producer. And so we really focus on what are the components that prevent adoption by the producer. And so we think to get adoption, soil health management systems, need to be profitable, resilient, and provide ecosystem services. And so, we have all these different things that we're working on. The first box at the top, middle, is the business case. We have to show that it's profitable, that soil health management systems reduce economic risk and improve drought resilience. There's some work going on, not by the Soil Health Institute, by many of our partners looking at land valuation. We certainly think that input requirements are a huge component of the business case, and we're gathering data about that right now. And of course, there's ecosystem service markets. They provide an opportunity to enhance the business case. A big thing that we're working on, we're very funded to look at, is measurement. What are the key indicators of soil health? How do we interpret them? What are carbon sequestration potentials? And how do we standardize the measurement of soil health? Not for scientists. Soil scientists, I'm always reminding people, soil scientists have their hypotheses, their soil processes. They have very specific things they want to test. We're talking about standardizing measurement for non-scientists. And even I think some soil scientists like Reagan does a lot of agronomic work, and maybe doesn't have a hypothesis specifically about a soil process, but he might want to inexpensively document how those cropping systems are changing and use some basic soil health measures. I mean, currently, I'm sure Reagan always measures soil total carbon, right? Like you're always, how is the carbon changing? That's a pretty standard one among scientists, soil scientists, but maybe there's a few other ones. The Haney test is very predominant, and I'm sure there's a lot of opinion about that one. I won't even go in that today. We're also working in education and training. We do a lot of personalized soil health management systems on the farm. We're developing decision support tools to give to anybody who wants to use them. And we really focus on soil health benefits and principles and practices, and we have some basic curriculum that we have written and that we use to help engage with farmers that are interested in soil health management. We do a lot of research and development as well. We have a great data set where we're trying to understand the microbiome, the soil microbiome, and how it's changing with management. Decision support tools for carbon sequestration and drought resilience. There's just, we've had before I came, there was a big symposium on soil health and human health connections. And then if you go down to the bottom, once farmers adopt, we have to quantify the change. We need to quantify the impacts, and we're identifying additional needs. So a lot of the quantification right now, there's a lot of markets that are developing on carbon sequestration. There's also markets on water quality and water quantity. And greenhouse gas emissions. And then ultimately, that productivity of that soil, we're trying to document that. And then also we have communications and consumer education. That's one I've learned a lot about lately, and it's just like you can't do enough communications. Just when you think you're all communicated out, you realize that, we're doing great things, but how do you get it out there and get it to the people that want that information? And of course, we're also trying to inform policy. So just a few projects to give you a taste of what we're up to. Our big project, we're actually collaborating with Texas A&M University AgriLife Research. Julie Howe is one of our partners on this project, and so is Jamie Foster, and someone up in the High Plains, but I don't know who we cooperate with there. I should. I'm embarrassed now that I can't remember the name, but anyway, we have sites all across North America. And the goal of our North American project to evaluate soil health measurements is to identify the most effective indicators of soil health. Our approach is to take these long-term agricultural research sites that have treatments and controls and replication, and they're long-term, and actually go and measure the soil and do it all at one time and do it with a standard suite of measurements so that we, meta-analysis is always hard, right? Especially in soil science, like, oh, they collected it in the fall, they collected it in the spring. It was a different way to measure. There's so many things to toggle that the idea was we'd just do a one-time collection across North America. I want to acknowledge our funders, General Mills and the Foundation for Food and Ag Research. General Mills is a really good partner, the Soil Health Institute. We interact a lot. And our other partners on the project is the Nature Conservancy and the Soil Health Partnership. And obviously our many partners at the universities and USDA and at Agri-Food, Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada, and Summit. So how did we do this? Before I came to the Soil Health Institute, SHI got together a bunch of scientists and looked at measurements, looked at, put them in these tiers of like, yeah, we know a lot about this measurement. No, we don't know a lot about this measurement, and decided on standard measures. And then another group of experts came in and decided on, I think there were 154 sites that were volunteered, that was purely voluntary. And then of these sites, Soil Health Institute got a group of experts just to look at the experimental design at all the sites and just figure out what needed to be, which ones should be collected. And so these are the actual points. And so the color behind this is just a climate moisture deficit. Essentially, it's looking at the precipitation and the temperature, so you can see the hotter, drier zones and the colder, wetter zones. And we have 17 sites in Canada, 87 in the US, and 16 in Mexico. And then we had a big meeting. This is when I joined the Soil Health Institute. You can see Julie Howe right there in the front. And trying to remember, oh yeah, there's Katie. Maybe it's Kate, it is Katie's sites that we measured, it must have been. And there's Kelsey, who's a visiting scientist there at Texas A&M. Anyway, we had met with these partners and tried to let them know what was going to happen. And the partners were awesome. As each of our scientists went out to these sites, it was more common than not that there was a team of students out there to help with sampling. Students, technicians, researchers, PIs, everything. It was really great. It was a lot of fun. The scientists really enjoyed it. And then the big thing is the management of the data collection. We sent all these samples off to the lab, and but what I have learned is that I thought that was going to be the hard part, is just getting out to all these sites in the spring and getting them sampled. And we did get 97 of them sampled in the spring before tillage and planting occurred. But the biggest thing has been getting that management data together. So we've requested 5 years of management data from each of the partnering scientists, locations, and yield. And so that has been, we're done now, but woo, that was tough. Okay, I'm gonna keep going here. So this is our first peer-reviewed publication of the Soil Health Institute, and it's just a description of the project. And if you want to take a look at it, it is open access. And if you just Google Norris, Charlotte is the first author, and then NAPSHM, North American Project to Evaluate Soil Health, but you can just use Norris NAPSHM, just like that, and you can get the paper. So just to remind you who we think our stakeholders are, obviously farmers and ranchers are our #1 stakeholder, but we all know that farmers and ranchers are in this nexus of policymakers, bankers, the finance industry, agribusiness, certified crop advisors, other land managers, ecosystem service markets, all sorts of things. And so as we're analyzing this data, we're thinking, what do each of these stakeholders need? Like, what is the level of soil health information that they need versus just saying, well, you have to measure 20 things, right? Different levels of certainty are needed by different stakeholders, and also different investment in measurement are needed by different stakeholders. But I had to show a little bit of data. This is a fun one. So these are over 2,000 samples, experimental units, at 124 sites. Each of these sites, there's a paired treatment, control, and a soil health management. So essentially what I say is whatever the local cropping system is, plus some soil health management practices. And these are some of the measurements that we made. And this is just showing, this is two things. One, I realize I uh-oh, I don't have a legend, but anyway, the location of these measurements is kind of, think about them as a principal component analysis, like how they're grouping together and giving different pieces of information. So it kind of makes sense that soil organic carbon, active carbon, respiration, they're all kind of close together. And then ACE protein index is a little further away. And then here are some of the microbial activity measurements that we can make. And essentially the color of the line that connects them is the Pearson's correlation coefficient. And I'll just say, because you don't, somehow I've lost the legend, purple means really low correlation and red means really high. That's about 0.8, I think, is the highest correlation between soil organic carbon and active carbon. And then as the colors get greener, if they're lower, I think about 0.3. So it just kind of gives you an idea of both correlation and how they take up principal component space together. So another thing that we're doing, again, is we're evaluating methods too. So one of the big questions is about aggregate stability. There's so many different ways to measure aggregate stability. And so we measured aggregate stability at all these sites. And in fact, Julie Howe measured aggregate stability at a lot of these sites. She was one of the labs we contracted with. And remember, at each site, we have business as usual and soil health management practices. And so now we have a difference in aggregate stability. And so here's some of the management actions like reduced tillage, cover crops, removing residue, and applying organic amendments. And we can see using log ratios. So essentially you just look at the difference at this treatments, and then we have like a lot of treatments. We can see that generally most of these soil health management practices improve aggregate stability, except, oh wait, it's not in here. Crop rotation seemed to have no effect on aggregate stability, but tillage, obviously reducing tillage had the greatest effect on aggregate stability. And so we can just kind of look at these different measures and how they're related with the management. So that's been a lot of fun. And we're also looking at like how to, what aggregate stability method is most consistently sensitive to these managements. And if 3 or 4 have similar sensitivity, is one cheaper than the other? So we're just looking at things like that. An example is aggregate stability method that was evaluated at Texas A&M University. And it's using a smartphone app. And this has been a lot of fun. The original methodology is from Mario Fajardo at University of Sydney. But one of our very own, Cade Flynn, has just published a paper in Soil Science Society of America journal. He is actually an undergraduate student that worked for me at Texas A&M University. And he was a freshman when he did the work. So I always think about the excellent access that I had at Texas A&M to outstanding students. So all the faculty on this call, remember that you have access to some world-class undergrads and graduate students, so take advantage of it. So anyway, the whole idea of this slide is that we have an iPhone app that can quantitatively give us aggregate stability. And that's pretty exciting when you think about outreach soil health measurements globally. So some of the concepts that we have is, we have this idea of soil health targets, where we have maybe, there's 4 soil health measurements you might take. We have business as usual, and then we have targets based on ideal management, soils that have been under ideal management for a while. And then, the idea is a farmer could go out, pull a soil sample, do 3 or 4 standard measurements, and look to see where they were compared to a business as usual system or a target system, and kind of give farmers, other than just telling a farmer, do this, 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 and this for management, and you'll have healthier soil. This is a different approach. It's kind of like, what's the output, and maybe inspire some innovation and some different ideas if farmers can monitor their own soil health. However, we know that that soil health is not, you can't just say target for the United States these soil health measures, because we know as soil scientists that soils vary inherently with parent material and climate across the US. And so an example of this is here we have organic carbon, And it's divided up, this is organic carbon from our database, and it's divided up in coarse, fine, and medium textured soils, so just like the Cornell Soil Health Assessment does. And then all I did is I just took the soils that are under this blue line of fine, and I mapped them out by major land resource areas. And we can see there's a huge difference in distribution in soil carbon. And, you know, climate and parent material are running this. And so we have a lot of work to do at the Soil Health Institute to start grouping our soils across the United States so that we can have targets for farmers. And my dream is in a couple of years, a farmer, just like Google Earth, can type in their lat long, and then they pull up their soil health test and they type it in with their lat long, and then some image like this comes up for them. And they can get an idea of where they're tracking with improving their soils. Some other really cool work we've done with this data set. This is work done by Diana Bagnall, an alum there at Texas A&M University. And I think this is going to be very impactful in the soil science community. And she's almost ready to submit her publication. But essentially, we showed that we can make pedotransfer functions. And this is very new, because the data that has been available through NRCS, we know that we can predict available water holding capacity using NRCS data just with texture. And I know I've just mapped clay content on the x-axis for simplicity, but I recognize that sand and silt also affect available water holding capacity. It's in the pedotransfer function. And what has changed is before, as we changed organic carbon, available water holding capacity didn't change very much. But now with our new data set, because we have paired business as usual and soil health management practices, we can actually quantify that effect of improving the soil structure with improvements in organic carbon. And now we can see that we have quantifiable, realistic changes in our plant available water holding with different amounts of organic carbon, and it's due to management. And so this is really exciting. And I can't wait to get this out, because I think it's going to be transformative for a lot of hydrology modeling. And also what we're doing with it, just as an example, like at Soil Health Institute, we don't stop with the publication. We're trying to get these things out there into tools. And so we're working with Colorado State University, and it's funded by the United Soybean Board, to get this equation into Comet Farms so farmers can look at how management not only changes their carbon, but changes their drought resilience. Some other things we're working on is mapping carbon. You know, when I was at Texas A&M, I worked a lot in proximal sensing, and of course I'm still at it. And so just to set up the problem, if we want carbon markets to work, we have a hard problem, because here's a field, a typical soil field, and our carbon is ranging from 0.5% to 4% in space. And then with depth, we see our carbon ranges from 0.6% to 0.2% in depth. And now, if we want to be able to say that, you know, generally management is going to change carbon by about 0.5%. And so if we want to know if this field increases in carbon in half a year, or in 5 years or 10 years, we've got to be pretty dang good at sampling. And the end game of it all is we work out the statistics and the variability and et cetera, all of these things. What we know is that these markets are not going to be viable without a cheaper way to quantify changes in carbon. And so one of the things we're working on at the Soil Health Institute is this rapid in-field carbon stock measurement tool. So it's using some technology that was patented while I worked at Texas A&M University, this deep sea penetrometer. Some work that's done at University of Nebraska with easy data acquisition and prediction modeling. Some work at University of Sydney that's patented on spatial sampling. And then the cool fun thing is we have a new scientist or an engineer that's joined our team, and he's using these same technologies to develop a handheld, like, you know, think of a cordless drill that you could walk into the field and drill down into the soil and measure carbon stock. So that's really exciting. We'll see how it goes. So we're also working on the business case. You know, we're not just measurements and that kind of science. We're also economic science. And so one of the projects that we've got is we're assessing profitability of soil health systems on farms. And we have 125 partial budgets that we have performed in the last 12 months. It has been one heck of a 12 months, especially considering half of that's been COVID. We started out with going to farm fields across the United States and physically, like in person, interviewing farmers. And then obviously around late February, that became a no-go. And so we've done the rest of our partial budgets on the phone. And that's been actually worked out really well. So we're happy with it. And this is just some highlight of the states that we have done partial budget analysis. Some of these states we've only done 2, but in the Midwestern states we've done 100. So over 10 to 20 partial budgets per state. And it's kind of interesting because on top of partial budgets, some other things we've done is we've had some questions that we've asked farmers. And so these are questions, and the farmers are answering based on their perception. And this is the results of 100 farmers that have were asked questions based on their perception, and these farmers had all successfully implemented either no-till, cover cropping, or cover cropping and no-till within the last 4 years. Well, 4 years or more. And so we asked them questions like, do you perceive that your soil health management practices improve your loan, land, or insurance terms? And you can see that's not a popular thing except for Indiana, Iowa, and Minnesota. There's something going on in those states. But all of the farmers believe that their soil health management practices improved water quality. Almost all of them said yes, that adopting soil health management practices and protects their license to operate, which is huge these days. And then about half of them did say that they measured or perceived increases in organic matter in their soil. And so that's kind of a little bit of the sociology side, but the economic side, what we're doing is we're actually making budgets, and Archie Flanders is doing this. So he asked the farmers about their management. And so let's say a farmer is doing no-till and cover cropping. He goes, okay, what does your average management look like? How is this management different from more conventional management in your area, or the more conventional management that you did before you adopted? And then he just takes the management practices and computes the price per acre of implementing those management practices based on published values. So, he does the depreciation, he does long-term yield prices, etc. And so this is an example out of Texas. I've shortened it tremendously, but it's cotton versus wheat fallow rotation. And essentially what he's showing is that this is not a cover crop, this is just a no-till system. So these are additional costs associated with no-till and reduced costs associated with no-till. So you could see that he has $9 extra in additional costs. He's got $6 extra in other inputs, but he's really has a reduction in fuel and electricity and labor. And ultimately, that reduction is coming out positive. And in this particular field, which is not common, there was additional revenues because he's perceiving greater yields associated with the soil health management systems. Most farmers, we ask them if they have additional yields, and they kind of, only about 50% say yes. And then of the 50%, we say, well, are the additional yields because of soil health management? And at that time, some will say, no, I'm just a better farmer, or no, because we think our varieties are improving. And so, and even if they do say they have like a certain yield increase, our ag economist does subtract that increase from what, the average increase in yield due to, varieties, crop improvement. So anyway, in this example, the farmer's reporting a extra net income of almost $300 an acre from doing no-till. And there's a lot of these, and you can find them on when we publish these, they'll be on our website here under business case. So we're also doing farmer training, and I think some of you know, because we have an agreement with AgriLife Research and AgriLife Extension, but I think right now things are kind of on hold as we figure out how to deal with COVID. But essentially, this is a project where we're doing continuous engagement with cotton farmers. The first 3 years we did North Carolina, first year we did North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Arkansas. And then the second year, which was this year, we were to engage Mississippi, Texas, and California. And that's, you know, as you can imagine, goes up and down right now. We're doing what we can. But the idea is that we have a basic training. We set up peer-to-peer farmer experiences at the training. So we bring the farmers that have been successful with soil health management practices to the training. And then actually we bust them all out to the farm so they can look at the implements used, and the farmer just talks about the how-to and all of that farmer's discovery on how to do management practices. And then we have some advanced training. And we do a lot of different tools and resources. This year, because of COVID, you can go on to our website and see our webinar series that David Lamb has created. Oh, and there's a really good thing on cotton and covers, farmer mentor interviews, and that's really well done and well produced. And I can say that I was not involved in it, I just got to watch it. And then David is also posting virtual field days right now where he's actually going out to farmers' fields and with a colleague and just like doing a field day, just the two of them. And they're fun, they're good. And the other thing he's doing is like he's doing some examples with field print calculator and just going to the mentor, you know, the farmer that's been successful, some of our challenge farmers that we're giving money to them to do cover cropping, and then some business as usual cases, and we're plopping their management into field print calculator and just giving them examples about how their management is changing their greenhouse gas score, their soil carbon score. This is all modeling, it's all examples. This is not peer-reviewed research, right? But it's extension and it's outreach. It's taking tools that farmers are already being exposed to. And in fact, I think Cotton Incorporated is using field print calculator in their sustainability work. So, you know, we're training farmers how to use it and how to interpret it and what to think about it. Other things that we're doing is I have right now a Certified Crop Advisor webinar series, and that's in a partnership with Soil Science Society of America, and the Walton Family Foundation has generously sponsored all of these. So what we're doing is we're taking our measurement data and the information we're learning from our North American project to evaluate soil health measurements and our economics work, and we just have this webinar series set out where we're just providing information. And for here, the goal is for certified crop advisors and ag retailers to reach them with this idea that, you know, if you wanted to sell soil health management, these are some of the measurements, and this is how you can understand the measurements. And then ultimately in December, we're going to recommend our standard measures for soil health. And then I think the real fun one's going to be in January, soil economics, because a lot of certified crop advisors are really interested in that, as am I. And just to let you know, a couple other resources. This was a documentary that was made. It's an hour long, so it's a watch. But, you know, maybe in your teaching or something, if you're looking for something to fill some time, it's educational and it's not all fluff. But anyway, it's the soil health documentary, Living Soil. And it's gotten actually a lot of views. I think we're at like 300,000 or something like that, like full watches or something. And it's been shown at a lot of kind of get together kind of things. With that, okay, we have a few minutes. I went a little longer than I wanted to per normal, but just want to thank you all for being here today, and it's good to see you.
Great job, Cristine, great job. Looks like you're covering a lot of ground at the Soil Health Institute. Seems like a very fertile area for research and application of that research. So let's open up for questions.
Oh, good time, Scott.
I do what I can.
Good stuff. I love it. I don't remember you being this entertaining when I was there. I don't know what's going on.
It's the camera. I'm a sucker for the camera.
You're a ham. Okay.
I had a question. This is Matthew Peterson.
Hi, Matthew.
I was wondering if you guys were I might have missed it, but are you looking at these sorts of assessments with farmers who have fields in CRP?
When you ask about assessments, what of the assessments are you talking about?
Just your general soil health parameters that you were presenting on. It's not like you're looking at
Okay.
crop rotation, like you're looking at these fields in till or no till. Are you also going to farmers who have fields in CRP and maybe looking at that organic matter for stability for when they're leaving that program?
No, we're not. That project is really focusing on long-term research sites that were implemented by scientists. And so we're just looking at whatever they have as their business as usual and their soil health management. There are a couple of range sites in there where they're looking at grazing intensity and different management strategies. But I don't think CRP is represented there. We did collect data at non-farm sites and perennial sites whenever we could near where the experiment was, but not CRP per se.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I have a question.
Okay.
So this is Akiko. I was wondering if when you do the economic analysis, the example you showed didn't seem to show like, you know, ecosystem services or anything of that sort of support. Is that common? Is that part of the equation?
In what analysis, Akiko?
So you had I'm sorry, just a second.
Let's see.
Shoot. Sorry. So you had the calculation of benefit and the cost for the farmers.
Oh,
right?
Oh, yeah. In that economic analysis.
Yeah, for the farmers, growers. I'm just familiar with it, but is ecosystem services, you know, that kind of support programs, is that a big component, or it's not yet?
It's not a quantitative component. Like the only thing we ask them is what ecosystem services they perceive to be changing with their soil health practices.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there isn't an ecosystem service market yet. Mm-hmm. Obviously, SHI is involved with the ecosystem service market consortium that's building out payments for greenhouse gases and water quality. But no, we have other projects where we're trying to quantify some of those ecosystem services, but in this economics, we're not even touching the soil. We don't measure it at all. I realize there's some comments, so maybe there's some questions on the chat. Sorry, y'all, I didn't even see these. Let's see. Go ahead if anybody else has a question.
I had a question, Dr. Morgan. This is Mark McDonald.
Hi, Mark.
So you talked about looking at soil health parameters in the long-term sites. Are you guys doing anything in terms of like recently implemented sites? So farmers who are thinking about doing no-till or cover crops, the first couple years are going to be really crucial in convincing them to continue those practices, right? Like in cotton, where you have a pretty thin margin. If they have a couple bad years, they might have to stop or even stop farming altogether. So are you guys looking into those and sort of maybe potentially trying to help in terms of those first few years, and if they do see a slight reduction in yield or something, convincing them that.
Yeah, so I think there's like two questions embedded in that. Like the first question really is, are we doing economic analysis of farmers that are starting? And we don't have funding for that yet, but we have written some proposals and some partnerships with a CIG grant with General Mills. Maybe if it gets funded, yes, that's exactly what we're going to do, is go in and look at the first 3 years of adoption and what those look like. Then as far as some other work that we're doing, like the whole reason why we're paying for mentors with the cotton producers is just that. There was some work that I did at Texas A&M University where producers that had adopted soil health management practices said things like, you know, there's a tuition fee to learn how to do these. And that fee is usually, like you said, some reduction in economic gain. And but one of the things that they said was that, you know, some of the more recent adopters in Texas didn't have to pay that tuition fee because they had mentors that had already paid and learned, and they were just a phone call away. And so we've found, both in that research project in Texas and now other evidence is showing all across the United States, that farmers that are successful are generally successful quicker when they have a mentor, someone they can call that has already been through a lot of the trials and tribulations, but also like when a decision has to be made, just somebody else to talk to and say, hey, what do you think? When maybe they don't know, but at least they can share some experiences that might be helpful in that decision making. So there's a lot of, there's a strong social learning component to that. There is the economic component to it. And certainly in our economic analysis, we only interviewed farmers that had been successful because we just wanted to start out and just ask the question, do soil health management practices pay? And so right now, all of that data is in peer review with NRCS because they want to co-label it. And so, and I can tell you, one of the things I've learned with NRCS is the peer review through NRCS is sometimes more stringent than the peer review through through fellow scientists in peer review journals. So it's been really good. And we're going to have that information out soon.
Hey, Cristine, you've got a question from Shakira in the chat section. Can you access it, or would you like me to read it to you?
Doesn't reduced tillage equal more chemical inputs? And if so, this adversely affects soil health in terms of microorganisms. That's really interesting. I can say from the economic analysis that I have seen, in some cases, it is more, but in most cases, it's just a change. What we've seen is farmers have to put out less expensive chemicals, because they're not dealing with herbicide resistance as badly. And so we do want to look at a project. We have a lot of plans, and one project that we want to work with is look at organic versus no-till cover crop systems and look at the effect of microbes. But since this is a room full of scientists, I've looked at the literature and there's not really profound data that says that adding like glyphosate changes the microbiome. It tends to change it in the short term based on the literature that I've read. But, then there's kind of, it's a kind of a short term versus long term thing, one day, couple hours versus months versus years. And those all tend to kind of show different results. But it's interesting, a lot of herbicides are carbon based, and so they're a food source for microbes, and that so it does change the microbiome either through adding a different food source or perhaps fungicides and things killing things that are in the soil. So I would say that there's a lot of research that needs to be had about that, but yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Fire away, Steve.
Okay, good to see you again, Cristine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, I don't mean to be cantankerous or anything, but about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a publication, I think it was in Nature, that they did a meta-analysis of comparing conventional tillage versus conservation tillage, and this was like 500 or 600 publications, and they actually found that conservation tillage reduced yield. Are you familiar with that paper?
Yeah. So first of all, that's
what was wrong with their concept there, please?
Sure. I can talk about soil. So first of all, conservation tillage versus conventional tillage, those are some pretty wide ranging categories. And, there's a lot of tillage and a lot of conventional conservation tillage. I think conservation tillage, you only have to leave 30% of the residue. So a lot of what we think today is conventional tillage is conservation tillage. So it's kind of difficult, first of all, to just say conservation versus conventional, because I think most conventional tillage now is conservation. Now, when you talk about conservation tillage versus no tillage, the farmers that we have interviewed that have mastered the art do not see reductions in yield. There is a lot of talk about the yield lag that happens during the learning process. And that's kind of one of the things about mentoring that helps. So this is the deal. When you're a farmer and you're learning how to do something new, you're learning how to do something new. And so I think that, that those are some of the educational and gaps. But I would say from what I have read and what I have seen, and actually a lot of work here by AgriLife Research shows that going to no-till and/or no-till and cover crops statistically does not decrease yield. It just, yield kind of stays the same.
Well, I remember this article, it hit the popular press circuit, and they just talked about yield reduction, that it doesn't work. And I was just wondering, was that really damaging? Did it set back your message?
No.
Okay, good deal. Thank you.
What year was that, Steve?
It was like 5 or 6 years ago, I believe.
So that's probably before I even worked at the Soil Health Institute even existed.
Yeah, I know that would never happen on your watch now.
Well, that's the nice thing about working at the Soil Health Institute. We're data driven. So if the data shows that something's more expensive, it is what it is. So it doesn't really matter. Science is science. And we also publish in the peer-reviewed literature, and we'll publish what we find. We're not going to sugarcoat it. That's for sure, because I don't think that gets anybody anywhere.
Thanks.
Yeah. Come on, there's got to be questions. Students, y'all don't have any questions? What is it?
I have a question for you in the chat.
There's a question in the chat.
Okay. So is this a question? What would be your protocol to recommend soil health indicator? Is it more based on sensitivity to the parameter? Or are you concerned the sensitivity may change within a season? So we only did a once over, right? So we're not looking at season variation. And I think the literature handles our understanding of seasonal variation in anything we measure. So some of the things that we're looking at is we're looking at sensitivity to that management practices. We're looking at redundancy of information. And we're also looking to see if some indicators work better in some geographical regions than others. And then ultimately it's about the pocketbook, because our stakeholders, if it takes $100 to measure soil health, you cannot scale that. And we're looking to scale to North America and to the globe. So it has to be scalable as well, which means it can't be $100.
More questions?
Hi, Dr. Morgan. I had another question. This is Mark again. With the recent sort of legislation that went through about dicamba, do you foresee any farmers reverting back to more conventional tillage practices because they can't control some of those herbicide-resistant weeds?
I don't know, because the big numbers I know about farmers in the U.S. come from NASS, and NASS only comes out every 5 years. What I do know is there's a really nice publication. It was out last year by SARE, and it was on economic analysis of cover crops. And as I think it said, it takes about 3 years for cover crop investment to pay off, unless you're in an herbicide resistant system. And then cover cropping pays off generally in the first or second year. So I think that herbicide resistance is one of the things pushing farmers into soil health management practices. And a lot of the farmers that you talk to that have more recently adopted soil health management, and successfully so, a lot of the kind of things you hear is like, I couldn't farm the old way. I had to figure out a new way. And so this was what it was. So I think that's some anecdotal evidence kind of summed up based on from our sociology work that I did at Texas A&M. But I would look at that SARE publication. I think it's quite striking that herbicide resistance, a great tool for that is cover cropping.
Another question?
Hi, my name is Banija Kankarla. I'm a postdoc here. And my question is about how is the work of Soil Health Institute, is it like more recent than the USDA and RCS? Because that's what gives you all the information that a farmer or anybody would need about their soil health. Does Soil Health Institute provide the latest updated or, additional information for the farmers to follow?
I hope so. I mean, I think we're on the front lines of the research. We don't do the agronomic research. That's really, extension and applied research at universities and ARS. But we do take that information as soon as it comes out. And since we're all scientists, we're reading the peer-reviewed papers, and we're also reading other papers. So yeah, I would hope that we are supplying the most recent information to be standard in the future. I think, so the Soil Health Institute was stood up in 2015, and they just started doing research about 2.5 years ago. And then I started, about 1.5 years ago. So yeah, I think, and we work, NRCS is our partners, and a lot of the nonprofits that are also working in the space we partner with. So I think we have a pretty healthy community, all with very similar goals to get the current science to farmers.
Thank you. That's good.
More questions? We've got her here. You can attack at will.
That's right. I like it. I'll take some attacks. Come on, Steve.
I have a question about a little bit more about like the structure of the Soil Health Institute. So is there a particular like policy or grant or like pool of money that allows you to do international work, or does that come from like private sector? How does that work?
So a lot of our funding comes from, let's see, our funding ranges Department of Energy, USDA, NRCS. We have partnerships with ARS, no funding, but partnerships. Our other funding comes from food and beverage, like Walmart.org, General Mills, a lot of the food and beverage companies. Cargill is one of our funding partners. For international work, we have negotiations ongoing, but nothing currently funded. We are a nonprofit, so we, just like a university, work off of what projects.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sarah.
Any more questions?
Thank you, Christine.
Hi, David. Good to see you.
Send us somebody to refill your position. We're re-advertising.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Well, thanks a lot, Christine. It was a great seminar, very engaging. There was a lot of interest in it. I'll say, I think you had the highest attendance so far. I counted 79 on my
Oh, right.
here.
Hey, I'm breaking, I got that with our Certified Crop Advisor program with the societies as well. So I don't know. I think people are just trying to figure out, ready to watch me mess up.
Yeah, that's
or maybe they think you have money.
Yeah.
Or maybe they think, Seth, I have knowledge.
You definitely have knowledge, but I think I've talked to a few people who are confused that think that Soil Health Institute's like a new funding agency. So I don't know if you've gotten that at all.
No, but we are hiring. We're hiring 2 new soil scientists, and as soon as I get my act together, I'll get the advertisements out. So we're hiring a early entry-level soil scientist and a more senior soil scientist. So, and maybe more actually. So, and one of our new projects is coming to Texas. I'm so excited. I got to call the old NRCS crowd in Texas soon. So we'll be in Texas soon sampling soils this winter.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Christine.
Thank you.
Everybody, bye-bye.
Same time next week. Growing Crop Sciences, Hour of Power.